Hello and welcome to Mad About Superheroes cartoon commentary on Spider-Man and his amazing friends. The episode that we are watching is The Bride of Dracula. Now I watched this on Amazon Prime and it's listed as the Transylvania connection, but the title card of the episode says The Bride of Dracula, so I'm going with that, what the series and the writers originally intended. For some reason it's changed, don't know why. As happens sometimes over the years, for whatever reasons. And I always put the intro of the episodes with these classic cartoons, and I always forget to mention that in the bedroom of Spider-Man and his amazing friends, where their room transforms, in the background there's a little painting, a poster of the Incredible Hulk, which is cool. Which is a nice nod. The Incredible Hulk and Bruce Banner guest starred in an episode that I did a commentary on before he got his own series, which is cool. And here's the title, the aforementioned title card, The Bride of Dracula, not Transylvania Connection. So that's how it's listed in the episode order on these streaming services. Don't know why. I'm not sure if it's the same on Disney Plus. I'll have to look into that because I have both. I've got Amazon and Disney Plus. Well, we got a nice little party scene going on here. Reminds me actually of the first episode of Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends, The Triumph of the Green Goblin, where it was like a costume party. I think it was a Halloween party, where there was a dance also. But here we have the continuing gimmick on the series, where Bobby and Peter are always competing for Angelica's affections. And sometimes it's a kind of a weird trio where they all like date each other sometimes. It's very weird. All playful and innocent, you know. But while they were arguing, she's moved on to other prospects. And no secret or surprise who this is going to turn out to be. It's going to be Count Dracula. But as in many iterations of Dracula, you know, he's got that, he could put a spell on you, like a trance, right? He can lure you in. And I've mentioned before, too, love the way that the Spider Friends are always busting each other's chops. There's always that cool banter. And at the time, too, going back to the 70s, Marvel Comics had a comic book series with Dracula that was called Tomb of Dracula. I think at the time, around the 70s, the character Bram Stoker's Dracula fell into public domain. So Marvel had previously, for a vampire character, they did Morbius, the living vampire, because of the comics code, they couldn't do like undead characters, so they had to use the tag of the living vampire. He was kind of a different kind of vampire, kind of like Blade. Blade was actually introduced in the Tomb of Dracula comic books, and kind of the same deal where he was I think that they did that later on. I don't think originally he was a half breed. That came later on. I think in those original comic books he was just a vampire slayer that would was going after Dracula in the Tomb of Dracula comics. But cool comic series. Illustrated by Gene Colan, classic comic artist, been around for years, was around for years. He passed quite a few years ago. And written by Stan Lee and Roy Thomas originally, before Marv Wolfman, who created Blade, took over. A cool comic series. And now, very simple premise in this episode. Dracula's taken a shine to Firestar and wants her to be his bride, hence the title of the episode. And he's made off with Angelica. He's put her under his trance, and of course, Spider-Man and Iceman have to get their friend back. And he's whisked her off in his limo to a little to a private jet that he has, and he's wants to go home to Transylvania. has a lot of the classic tropes of a lot of the Dracula film adaptations. he's kind of like the Marvel Comics Tomb of Dracula character, but different also. I think they had to make it for rated G. Had to go really soft for this cartoon series, it being a Saturday morning cartoon series. Much like the comics code, where they couldn't do certain things, like undead characters in the comics. Television has the broadcast standards. For children's television, certain things you can't do. So they toned it down. But like I said, it kind of reminds me of the Tomb of Dracula character. But then when they show when he transforms into Dracula in a few minutes, where he's got like a goatee, I don't remember the Tomb of Dracula character having that. The Tomb of Dracula character was more the model for him was based on Jack Palance's Dracula. That was the artist Gene Colan's input into it. That's how he saw when he drew. That was what he was channeling when he was drawing Dracula, which is cool. And very befitting. Dracula has a black jet, black jet, as Iceman commented. And now we got this Bruno character who's like that's a servant of Dracula's, and he's like a wolfman. So very befitting the season. We're in October. Halloween is approaching, and it's why I wanted to do this episode specifically. And now we have the transformation where he's gone full Dracula with a goatee, or that's a Van Dyke, right? Yeah, that's a Van Dyke. We got Spider-Man and Iceman following not too far behind on a commercial airliner. And Iceman's just chilling with his legs crossed, and Spidey's trying to hold on. I mentioned Morbius. So recently there was a not telling you anything you don't already know because it's out there. Is the film that just recently came out? I just recently watched that on Netflix. Very forgettable film. Not very good. It wasn't as bad, but when you go into something with low expectations, you always say like, "Oh, well, it wasn't as bad as I thought," or it could be, but not so good either. Like this, Dracula is mug all up in the window of the plane. I like the hypnotic effect that they do here. It's kind of like a purplish color. It's very cool looking. He's trying to hypnotize Spider-Man there, and Spider-Man lost his balance. And conveniently, for the sake of the episode, to have a Spider-Man in some danger, his web shooters are frozen, right? Nice man's got to do his thing to help his buddy. As much as they bust each other's chops, it's just all in good fun, which I like. Nowadays, that's always kind of seems to be toned down a lot, But I like that. It reminds me of like buddy action films, like Lethal Weapon, stuff like that. When they have that cool banter going on and a lot of fun to be had at the expense of the characters. It's one of the reasons why I like this series. And Firestar, when she's in her Angelica Jones form, she resembles Mary Jane from the early Spider-Man comic books that John Romita drew. So that was maybe the model for, when they designed the character going into the series and pre-production. But of course has her own thing, Also, and not surprised that they didn't just make it Mary Jane, because like now they have like, what is it, like Spider Gwen, which is funny. So they could have made it Mary Jane, but I'm glad that they didn't. That it's an original character, even though it may be inspired by the look of Mary Jane. Big fan of the Firestar character. When they were in pre-production, also they had like different names for her character too. That they were trying out, like Firefly and Heatwave. But I think Firestar is a good choice, even though it might have been inspired. It might have been inspired by Starfire from DC. I like how Dracula's jet just changed completely, a very toyetic look to it, or it looks like a bat. It would have been cool if they had a toy line of the Universal characters back in the '80s. They might have. I don't. It was just if they did, it was under my radar. And now we have Frankenstein's monster, kind of. It's a version of it, like where it's like a robot. It's not exactly. Again, I think that certain things that they had to do to get that G rating, he can't be. It would be like having another undead character, or where he's like, basically stitched together from other parts of people, and all that weird stuff. So, I guess to get around that, he's just a robot, and he's one of Dracula's minions. Dracula is always in charge. Like shortly after this, in the mid '80s, there was a movie called The Monster Squad, where they got all the Universal monsters together, and Dracula's in charge. He's the guy. He's the leader. And actually, the guy that's doing the voice of Dracula is an voice actor named Stanley Jones, and he did the voice for Professor X on on the X-Men episode, the Firestar is Born. And there was also one that's called I did a commentary on A Firestar is Born, but there's another X-Men episode called the X-Men Adventure that I haven't touched on yet, but we'll get there. And very macabre stuff going on. They got the spooky castle. They're in Transylvania, and Dracula wants to make Angelica his bride, so he's put her in a coffin, and it's got like the dirt in there, like she's got to sleep on like the earth. And Angelica would be kind of a stand-in for Mina Harker, the Bride of Dracula, and like the classic stories. And it has all this, most of the tropes. He turns into a bat. Like I said, there's certain things they can't do. So, but they're trying to stick to it. So we got Dracula, Frankenstein's monster, and kind of a Wolfman. So it's trying. But like I said, I think it's a cool like Halloween episode. I'm not sure, or I can't remember if it had aired on Halloween, but very befitting the season. And fun, something you can check out with the whole family. Although if you have kids now and you're watching it, they might think it's goofy by today's standards, but it is what it is. So I mentioned the Blade character earlier. Of course, Wesley Snipes played Blade in the films. There was a trilogy of films, and although it's the weakest film, I did like the inclusion of some of the characters, like Whistler's daughter, and then they had Ryan Reynolds play Hannibal King, which I like his character because in the '90s they revived a lot of these characters, and they had a comic called The Night Stalkers, and Blade was in that. A different version again. It was they were updated the character from what it originally was in the '70s, and he had like a cooler look, like with of course black leather and spikes and all that kind of stuff. And that's when they made him the half breed, where he has all the powers of the vampires, but none of their weaknesses. He's the Daywalker, all that stuff that they incorporated into the films with Wesley Snipes, which were cool. And the '90s Spider-Man cartoon series had quite a few episodes where Blade had guest starred on that. And going back to the Tomb of Dracula comic book series, Spider-Man had guest appearances in that where he fought Dracula. So that this episode reminds me of that, or checking out those, because I didn't know about those comic books when I was watching this series, but going back and getting some of the back issues, and because I always go into the history of stuff that I like, and reminding me of this episode. Like maybe that's why he guest starred on Spider-Man, because he was in the Tomb of Dracula comic books. And I always would love, they just did it too, where I mentioned on another episode when Spider-Man would make different shapes and things out of his webs. And I brought up the parachute in the previous episode, and he just did that in this one, which is cool. I always like that. Or the old costume had like wings, like under his arms. The original Steve Ditko costume. And also wanted to point out too, sometimes you get the Stan Lee narration, sometimes you don't. And this episode is very sparse. It's kind of weird when it shows up. Usually when he's narrating an episode, it's right from the jump, right from the beginning. And he gives you a little bit of setup. But in this one, he just pops in and out like a couple times just to explain things, that are going on. But yeah, so I just thought it was kind of weird the way it's done in this one. But always love to hear Stan Lee, pop up in an episode and do his thing. Very distinct voice, and just a trigger of nostalgia whenever you hear Stan Lee's voice. Now we got Spider-Man and Iceman finally facing off with Dracula. They're trying to. Angelica's under his hypnotic trance. Although in this whole episode, like I said, because there's certain things he can't do, he never tries to bite her or drink her blood. Because again, I don't think you're not going to get away with that on a Saturday morning cartoon. So it's just this trance thing that he puts her under, and he intends to make her his bride and all that. So I guess he'd have to keep her under that trance forever. That's a lot of work, man. Instead of just turning her. And of course, she's, always love when they come up with an excuse for superheroes to fight. In this case, specifically, Iceman and Spider-Man, have to hold back while Firestar is under Dracula's control, and she can just go full force because she doesn't know what she's doing. So that's kind of interesting too. And classic, the fire and ice characters, when they have to go up against each other, it's always like, what's stronger, fire or ice? Or are they just as strong as, the other? And I mentioned earlier that the Dracula from Tomb of Dracula was heavily influenced on artist Gene Colan by the Jack Palance Dracula, but there's been many other actors that have played before Jack Palance. Classically, Bela Lugosi was the original, and of course Christopher Lee is another favorite. I like Frank Langella because Frank Langella was very much under my radar in the 80s. Didn't know who he was until the Masters of the Universe movie, and I loved his performance in that as Skeletor. And I wanted to find out more about him, and then I found out that he played Dracula, and I had to see that movie, and liked his Dracula in that. And then, of course, fast forward to the 90s, and we get Francis Ford Coppola did Bram Stoker's Dracula, and Gary Oldman played Dracula in that, and loved that movie. Always watch it around this time of year. It's one of my favorites. I like it just a little bit more than the Frank Langella Dracula. So those are probably my two favorite Dracula movies. Although I do like the classics with Bela Lugosi and some of the Christopher Lee stuff, but always rewatch Francis Ford Coppola's Bram Stoker's Dracula. And Gary Oldman was, famous for playing villains. I think before, or one of his first performances as like a hero type character was in Batman Begins. But again, love the imagery in this. Has a very spooky Halloween feel to it, like when Dracula transforms back and forth into the bat. It reminds me of all those old movies. And this is fun too, where Spider-Man's trying to break through Dracula's trance on Firestar, and he's trying to, make her nostalgic for those old memories and remind her of who, of Peter and Bobby and Miss Lion and Aunt May and all that. Very well done, and you can see like the images like in her head. Love the Dracula transformations. A lot of cool stuff in this episode. It's fun. And here we go, Stan Lee, the narration there. Very cool. And I like this bit that's coming up too, where they show the transformation of Firestar backwards, back into Angelica Jones. They don't usually do that, but it's probably the only time that they've done that. It's usually you always see her, Firestar, and she transforms, So that was cool. It kind of reminds me also of there was the one He-Man episode that I just actually recently did a cartoon commentary on, The Problem with Power, where the same thing happens, where you never see He-Man, regress back to Prince Adam. And they do that in that episode. So that's what this, reminds me of. And they finally got Angelica away from Dracula. And again, another spooky setting. Looks like a spooky laboratory here. And they've got all the creatures after them now. They got the Frankenstein's monster kinda, and kinda the Wolfman, trying to bust through the door to get them. And I always like that the Frankenstein monster here. They go with like a gray tone. Kind of reminds me of the first appearance of the Hulk. But I always like when they do like the green, Frankenstein's monster. I always like when they go with the green thing. But for some reason they didn't do it here. Speaking of the Francis Ford Coppola Dracula, after the success of that, they tried to do Mary Shelley's Frankenstein with Robert De Niro as Frankenstein's monster, and that was okay. But I think Robert De Niro was a weird choice for that role. But I digress. And this is a fun bit too, where the robot Frankenstein's monster has got Angelica Jones, up in the air, and he's about to throw in this pit. And Dracula's ordering him not to, but he thinks that she's the source of the problem, so he wants to get rid of her. And he holds her up there like forever. Like he could have just thrown her in like 10 times, while Spider-Man's trying to come up with some kind of scientific, a way of getting them out of this. And Iceman's fighting the Wolfman, and it just takes forever. He could have just thrown her in. So he's basically made like smelling sauce for Angelica to wake up. And again, she's still up there in the air. He could have thrown her in. It just takes forever. It's silly. And she finally turns into Firestar to get away from Frankenstein's monster, kinda. And again, Dracula's just standing there while they're talking. it's so silly. It's like twice in a row in the same episode. Love how Dracula covers his face with his cape. It's very classic looking. And now she's using her powers to create sunlight, because that's one of Dracula's weaknesses. But it plays out differently here. It doesn't kill him or burn his flesh off or whatever, like, what would, usually happen. And Frankenstein's monster's robot here is falling apart now because Dracula's been weakened. Same thing with the Wolfman. He's gonna change back to his original form, which is apparently Dracula's butler. But the sunlight doesn't have the same effect that we would normally associate with Dracula. He just turns back to a man. So it's kind of silly. It doesn't make sense. But again, they can't do so. They can't have him die or turn to dust. So and now Firestar's been out of it, so now she's finally getting her memory back or recollecting what happened. So yeah, so this guy, he's just a guy. I don't know what that means. He just turns back to a human. He forgets everything. That's weird. I like the joke here that Firestar should be happy that he doesn't remember, like her secret identity. But she's like, a girl wants to be, unforgettable. Just silly shit. But very fun episode. That's why I wanted to mention too earlier. A lot of the sound effects in this are recycled from Battlestar Galactica and Buck Rogers, which is cool. They're very recognizable. Like when Firestar, uses her heat beams or heat waves or whatever, and when Iceman uses his, to make ice or whatever. Yeah, the recycled sound effects from Battlestar Galactica. Who Buck Rogers recycled it from Battlestar, and now it's on Spider-Man: His Amazing Friends. Very cool episode. Always happy to revisit Spider-Man and His Amazing Friends. And like I said, I wanted to get this in because it was very Halloween-y. And thanks for tuning in to Mad About Superheroes. And we will see you on the next one.